So one of the most common types of case interview questions is a guesstimating or market sizing question. Basically, whenever consultants need a number that's extremely difficult to calculate, guessing or estimating is used to come up with a value that's functionally good enough for whatever they're looking for. Before moving into the actual question, there are a few important things to remember. First, when an interviewer asks this type of question, they're not looking for one exact right answer. They are looking for your method of thinking. And also, it's important to remember that it's perfectly okay to ask your interviewer if you can have a minute or two to collect your thoughts before giving them your answer. So when approaching these types of questions, there are 4 easy steps you can take. First, right after your interviewer asks you the question, it's important to clarify it to make sure that you and your interviewer are on the same page and that nothing is unclear or vague to you. And then the second step would be to break down the problems into smaller, easier steps and then solve each one at a time before finally consolidating all of those pieces into a final result that you present to your interviewer. So if the question is something like, how many people wear red in New York on a typical Monday? The first step would be to clarify what exactly that means, because the question is pretty vague. So by New York, does your interviewer mean the city or the state? By wearing red, does your interviewer mean that the person is wearing red from head to toe or wearing one article of red clothing? And if a person is wearing red and they go out more than once, if they leave their house more than once, do we count them more than once or just once, regardless of how many times they go out? So let's say the interviewer answers that they're talking about New York City, and that if any piece of clothing that a person is wearing is red, that person is considered to be wearing red, and we don't count anybody twice. The next step would then be to identify mathematically which factors determine the number of people wearing red in New York on a typical Monday. So the first question would be, how many people are there in New York City? And the second question would be, what are the chances that people will wear red? That second question has 2 parts. The first would be, how many pieces of clothing are people wearing, and what are the chances of one of those pieces being red? So next we would move on to actually solving those questions. So the New York City population is 20 million people, and that's just one of those questions that you need to know going into a case interview, along with like the population of the United States and of other major cities. The next question would be, how many pieces of clothing do people wear? And this is where you can really show the methodical thinking, because you can break this down into 3 different categories. Maybe people who stay home, people who leave their house once, and people who go out more than once. So it's a Monday. People are going to work, people are going to school. Probably not that many people are staying home. So let's say that there are 5% of the New York population in that category, and those people wear 2 pieces of clothing. Next are the people who go out once, who maybe just go to work or school and then come home, and those people wear 5 pieces of clothing. That would be most of the population, so let's say that's 70% of the population. And then there are the people who go out more than once, maybe the people who go to work or school and then go out to dinner later. That would be the remaining 25% of the population, and those people we could say wear 10 pieces of clothing. So next, let's assume that out of 10 colors, 7 basic colors plus black, white, and gray, assuming that people don't have any color preferences, there's a 10% chance that each piece of clothing will be red. So then we can consolidate and actually do these calculations. So if 5% of the population is staying home, and the population is 20 million people, then 1 million people are staying home. And we can multiply that 1 million times the 2 pieces of clothing that they wear, times the 10% chance that those pieces of clothing will be red, and get 200,000 people. Next, we would move on to the people who go out once, 14 million people, who are wearing 5 pieces of clothing times 10%, that would be 7 million people wearing red. And out of the people who go out more than once, 5 million people, 25% of the population, times 10 pieces of clothing, times 10% chance of those pieces being red, we would get 5 million. And then all we have to do is add up those totals to get 12.2 million, and that would be the number of people who are wearing red in New York on a typical Monday.